in about a week's time or so. So from everyone at Real, again, I'd like to welcome you. In particular, we'd like to welcome Leslie. Thank you so much, Leslie, for accepting our invitation to lead the seminar this afternoon. We're looking forward to what you're going to be sharing today. The process is, I'm going to be handing over to my colleague, Palesa. Palesa is a PhD student, almost not a PhD student, Palesa. She's about to hand in. Just about to hand in a PhD student at Real, and she is our seminar coordinator. So she has been doing a lot of hard work to plan the seminar series and organize all the logistics related to the seminar series. Palesa will be introducing Leslie, our speaker for this afternoon. And after Leslie's done, my colleague Stephanie Allays, who holds the Saatchi Chair in Skills Development, will then open the floor for questions and answers. We invite you to use both the chat function as well as the Q&A and to put forward your questions as well as comments. So once again, thank you from all of us, and we look forward to your participation this afternoon. Palesa, over to you.
Thank you, Prisha. So yes, Palesa is still a PhD student at Real, but I'd like to welcome Dr. Leslie Powell, who is the Research Chair for Youth Unemployment, Employability and Empowerment at the Nelson Mandela University. She is also currently appointed as an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Nottingham. Dr. Powell has worked in the area of post-school education and training since the mid-90s. She has also served as a researcher to the National Commission of Higher Education's Technical Writing team. Later, her interests shifted to technical vocational education and training. And today, the title of her paper is COVID-19 and National Skills Planning in Search of the Holy Grail. And as Steph said, it's quite an interesting title. So we're very excited. Over to you, Dr. Powell.
Thanks, Palesa. And thanks so much to the Real colleagues, Prisha and Stephanie. This has been a wonderful webinar series. And I was saying earlier on that we've been using them for dialogues with our doctoral students. So it's a great space. So thanks for including me in it. Let me share my screen. So let me know, can you see this?
Yes, we can, Leslie.
You can see it, all right. The title for this, for my presentation draws from a paper, and the paper is currently in review. The paper is called COVID-19, a National Skills Planning in Search of the Holy Grail. This paper's been ongoing. It's actually been, I've been working on it and picking on it for about 5 years, and I've never quite felt comfortable with it. So the first version was developed for the ETDP, and it was part of a research project called Education and Training Intervening in Youth Unemployment. And it really focused on critiquing the skills mismatch argument and the supply and demand argument. And the CETA was very unhappy with the paper. And so they felt that it wasn't really useful, in fact, usable, that they couldn't use it because it didn't fit with the paradigm within which the CETA was working. So the second version was during the MERCETA project called the Lived Livelihoods Project. And in this version, I tried to bring the capabilities approach to our thinking of skills planning. And the aim of this project was to track over 2 years, 40 young people and to young entrepreneurs working in engineering related areas. And we wanted to get a sense of what are their skill needs. And it was great bringing the capabilities lens to it, but there was also some real difficulties. It was difficult to discern tacit knowledge. It was difficult to identify skill differentiation as people linked and they worked and they problem solved collectively. And it was particularly difficult to understand, to come anywhere close to understanding what the skill needs might be. So we brought labor process theory to the thinking, and this helped a little bit to understand how work was organized, which tools people were using, how they were organizing their workspace and their workflow, as it were. The third version was done as part of, in a response to Mercator's call to us, which was Mercator wanted to provide some kind of training to the participants who were involved in the Lived Livelihoods project, and they asked us to have a think about it. And so I did the third version, which brought the capabilities approach together with social skills ecosystem thinking. And this is the version that's now been submitted. And at each stage, I think it grew, it lost little bits and it kind of added other little bits to it. So in the paper that's been submitted, I've excluded all of this work, which was done in the ETDP, the first and the second round of it, which was submitted as reports because, well, it was too long actually. And I went a little bit crazy trying to track the skills mismatch discourse in the country. I actually looked at Hansard. I looked at Hansard, and the first time that it was mentioned in Hansard was in 1997. So that is the first time it was, well, captured in Hansard anyway. The work undertaken by the DPRU in the late 1990s was really foundational, not just for the skills mismatch argument, but also for how we've come to understand that argument and how we've methodologically and epistemologically worked within that space. So what the DPRU did was they aimed to determine the absolute and relative shifts in labor market demand by analyzing the October household survey from 1990 to 1995, I think. And the conclusion was that the shifts that were experienced were not skills neutral, and that South Africa had experienced a relative increase in the share of high-skilled workers and a decline in demand for low-skilled workers. About half a decade later, the HSRC's publication, The Overview of South African Human Resources Development, and I actually submitted an article, in fact, Glenn is here. Glenn and I submitted with others a chapter to that review, and the review concluded that skills deficit occur in all of the different education levels and in all of the different labor levels, and in fact that it's critical to address this because it's one of the strongest causes of youth unemployment. And so by the end of the 1990s, the logic of the skills mismatch and its methodological framing and the epistemological approaches that we adopted to address it had been set in stone. And since then, it's been, and the reason for the title of the paper, it's been the search for the Holy Grail. I think it's important for us to remember that even though the language of skills mismatch turned up in, was only reflected in Hansard in the late 1990s, the dialogue around the skills mismatch has a much longer and a much older trajectory. And I think Linda Chisholm's work captures that really well. So if anybody wants to check that history, then that's a good place to start. So I've put two quotes down, and if you read the two quotes, the one was in the 1980s. It's a quote by Harry Oppenheimer, and the other one is from the HRD. And what you will see is that the two quotes are really similar, isn't it? And they sound as if they're coming from the same historic period. So it's something to think about when we think about the skills mismatch post-apartheid as it being part of a longer trajectory. There's a number of critiques of the skills mismatch argument, and in the first and second versions of this paper, which was done in 2016 and then again in 2018, I kind of really climbed into this literature, into a lot of detail. And I've since seen David and Zapelo's paper, and they've done it so well, I think. You know, they succinctly capture into 7 coherent and persuasive problems what the problem with the skills mismatch argument is. And it's a paper I think that's worth looking at. And throughout this presentation, I am constantly referencing and pointing to people's, yes?
Yeah, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see your slides moving.
Oh.
You can only see the first slide.
Thank you for telling me. Don't know what's going on. Let me stop share and try again. Okay, where are we now? Can you see it now?
Yeah, now you're on Balwans and Mwangu.
Okay, so let's hope it continues to move and I don't have to stop share on each slide. So I was saying that I've referenced quite heavily throughout this presentation and throughout the paper as well, because I really want to make the point that the paper builds on a body of work and that there's a large body of work both in and out of the country that deals with this topic and that we need to be grappling with it. I'm not going to talk about the critiques. I think Stephanie did it fantastically. I think Hugh Lauder did it and did it extremely well. Lisa Wheelahan in the same webinar series has also spoken to it. So I don't really think I need to cover it here. But having accepted the critiques that we've made of the skills mismatch argument and of the weaknesses of a supply and demand framework, where does this lead us? So I've changed slides, Stephanie. Has it shown the change in slide?
Yeah, we can. It's moving now.
It's moving, great. Where does this leave us? And so this is the heart of this paper. I mean, how do we think about this? What are the new ideas we might want to bring to the party? So before we bring those new ideas, there's 3 ideas I really want to flag as 3 ideas that I think we need to get rid of when we're thinking about skills and poverty. The first is that economic growth contributes to poverty alleviation. I kind of went down a rabbit hole in 2019 on this literature, and I really wanted to not take an ideological, but take an empirical perspective on this argument. So the biggest body of literature that has supported some kind of relationship between economic growth and poverty is Kuznets. It's based on Kuznets' 1955 inverted U curve. And basically what economists have done using this curve is that they've shown a correlation in some cases between economic growth and poverty reduction. The fact, though, is that even amongst your most conservative of economists, I think you would be hard-pressed to find an economist who makes this argument today. The strongest empirical evidence is that there is no such link. In fact, the argument is that a relationship reflects when other conditions are in place. And of course, economists differ on what those conditions might be, with Piketty concluding that instead of raising all boats, as we often argue, in fact, economic growth has frequently served to increase inequality because resources are not equally distributed across the society. The second idea that I think we need to get rid of is the supply and demand argument. You know, the idea that if we just get the supply right, demand will follow. Stephanie did a full webinar on this, and so if you haven't seen it, I would strongly suggest that you go back and have a look. It's an excellent webinar. And I like Thoreau's arguments about this. And as far back as 1972, Thoreau was saying that in fact, education and the economy can't be understood as jobs competition. It must be understood as wage competition. It must be understood as jobs competition. His argument is that job skills, as we understand it and as we define it, don't exist in the labor market. They are in fact acquired on the job. They exist during and in work, and that's where they're developed and that's where they're acquired. So skills and qualifications in this logic exist then as one proxy. And of course there are others: race, gender, class, culture, language, the way you look, the way you sound, that are used to identify those with the greatest potential to convert skills linked on the job into productive labor. So effectively, qualifications and work experience then become this proxy. I think the third idea that we need to throw away is that skills, that's a typo, it's not skills, yeah, is that skills can fix a broken school system. It just can't. You know, the OECD League tables rank South Africa 75th out of 76 countries. So this is really a shocking ranking, and the 2016 TIMSS report places us right at the bottom. So we don't want to get into the whole ranking debate, and we know the problems with it, but I think it's a reflection of the direction. And I think we must accept that skills simply can't do this. It cannot fix a broken school system. That's a different job. That's not the job of skills, and we can't really take that on board. So where does that leave us, you know? Having discarded these ideas and having indicated that they're not working for us, what do we replace them with? So I brought in this paper, I brought two theoretical lenses to the table. The one is the capabilities approach, and the one is what I'm calling social skills ecosystems. And sometimes they overlap and sometimes they contradict. And the job here is not to compare, to contrast them, or even to bring them together. In fact, Simon McGrath and I are working on a paper where we're doing that. It's a different job. The job is simply to line them up and to say, what do they suggest about how we might think about skills planning going forward? How we might think about our national skills development planning system, and how we might begin to reorientate our national skills planning system to be more relevant to the world that we find ourselves in. And I want us to just remember that the world that we find ourselves in is the world that produced the looting crisis that we saw in KZN and Gauteng weeks back. You know, it's also, we are all living during COVID, which is why we are talking to each other like this. So we're in a new moment. And I think these questions have been on the table for a while, but we're now at the point where they've become quite critical and where the world is asking that of themselves. So perhaps when we're thinking about building back better, this is one of the foundations that we need to really take apart and re-look at and rethink. So I want to talk about the capabilities approach, and I want to unpack it a little bit. I think the capabilities approach is a promising alternative, which is why it was brought to the Merseyter lived livelihood study, because we thought that it might take us forward. You know, it might be a lens within which we can look at how young entrepreneurs who are working in the informal sector, what learnings they have, what they needed to learn, unlearn, what their skills needs might be going forward. So the capabilities approach focuses on human flourishing rather than on economic growth. It does that very unapologetically. That's the heart of the capability approach. It says economic growth, if you believe it leads to poverty alleviation or not, that is a means. And the focus has to be first and foremost on human beings, human well-being, human flourishing. So it's a social justice framework in that sense. Central is the identification of the capabilities that matter, where capabilities talk to meaningful opportunities and functionings talks to achievements. So this is a kind of capability speak or capability language, if you like. And we're not talking about capabilities as capacities. We're talking about the term within this framework, which means meaningful opportunities that people have the freedom to use. The capabilities approach does two things. It makes two distinctions, which are very important, I think, when we think about skills development. The first is that it separates capabilities from functionings. It says, hold on a minute, whenever we look at any system, we tend to look at the achievements, but we can't do that. You have to look at the opportunities that people have to achieve. You have to look at the array of opportunities that they have available to them from which they might be able to choose. So for example, a young person who goes to TVET because they really, really want to work within the trades and they've chosen to be very different to a young person who applies to go to university, is not accepted and ends up at a TVET college. These are two different people. Their feeling about their TVET experience, the attitude to it, the reason why they're there, everything changes. So it makes this key distinction, and it insists that when you do any developmental intervention that you make this distinction. You don't focus on the achievements, but you focus on the meaningful opportunities that people might be able to choose from. It also makes a distinction between resources and capabilities and functionings. This is a key distinction that it makes. So it says that simply giving people the same amount of resources doesn't mean that they are equally able to convert those resources into a capability and opportunity or functioning. For these, you need conversion factors. What the conversion factors might be, might differ. So if you take NSFAS, for example, everybody is given the same amount, the same NSFAS allocation who comes to Tivit College. Everybody who goes to university, they are provided with the same NSFAS allocation. Some people are able to convert that into a successful qualification and others are not. It sits within the space of the conversion factors. What might those conversion factors be? So from a capability lens, if you're looking at a skills development space, you really want to focus on what are the conversion factors that makes it possible for somebody to utilize an opportunity, for somebody to utilize a resource. What do we need to put in place to make that happen? So a key question for the capabilities approach would be, which institutions and which structures enable or disenable or expand or contract capabilities and valued functionings? So in this presentation, I want to focus on 3 aspects of the capability approach. I just want to shine a light on them. There are others, but let's just focus on these 3 aspects. So the one is what is called the informational basis of judgment for justice. It's called IBJJ. So if you see it in the capability literature, that's what it stands for. And the second is the capability for voice, and the third is the capability for education. In terms of the IBJJ, Bonvin and Favreau make a distinction between what they call the substantive and the procedural levels. The substantive talks to the categories of information, the actual information sets that are regarded as important and that are included, and those that are not. The procedural talks about the processes of inclusion or exclusion that takes place during the compilation of the information set. So what this means, if you reflect on these 2 terms in terms of our skills system, you will see that in fact our current skills planning system really prioritizes at the substantive and the procedural level the opinion of formal sector employers, mainly large enterprises, 150 plus. Although at 50 plus they should be submitting for the main. We are listening to the voices of large enterprises at 150 plus employees. This is really a strange way about going through, about doing planning, when we consider that the majority of jobs post-apartheid have been in the informal sector and in micro. So we're excluding that entire economy, the informal sector and the SMMEs. We also include the voices of young people. The last statistic, I've just stopped looking actually, but the last statistic I looked at said an unemployment rate of 62% gross unemployment for young people. I mean, that's just shocking. So we've excluded them completely from the discussion. Their experience, what matters to them, doesn't matter. We've orientated everything towards the formal sector, towards large enterprises. And yet economists keep telling us the same story. Large enterprises are shedding jobs. Micros and the informal sectors where jobs are actually being created. It ignores care work such as childcare, care of the elderly. And if COVID has taught us nothing, these aspects really matter. What you regard as an essential worker begins to be those workers that in fact do care work. The second aspect is called the capability for voice. And there's a bit of a literature around each of these aspects in case you want to have a look at it. So Sen's argument is that freedom is both the primary end and the principal means of development. And in the absence of that freedom, development can't happen. There are 2 practical reasons for it, really. I mean, the first is that if you don't engage people, your intervention just might not do what you think it's going to do. And the second is that if you open up space for democratic participation, you really open up space for public debate, public scrutiny, and for public dialogue to unpack not just the way in which something's being done, but also the reason by which it's being done. Critical to the capability approach is that contests the ontology of the human that underpins skills planning. So while skills planning tends to see human beings in this kind of rational choice theory way, you know, these atomized, competitive individuals competing against each other for scarce jobs and trying to be one up against their neighbor so they might get the job and somebody else might not. The human development approach or the capability approach is, hold on a minute, humans should be valued in and of themselves, and their human flourishing and their human well-being should be the aim of all developmental interventions. If it's not aiming to do this, it's not a developmental intervention. Don't even call it that. Don't call it skills development planning if that's not what you're aiming to do. So human diversity is recognized and celebrated. A capability state then, according to Dean and colleagues, would make decisions based on what they call capability intuition, which is through coordinating mechanisms rather than being through big data sets or through managerial decision making. It's about establishing these mechanisms for negotiation at local levels, spaces where people can come together, deliberate the problem, together co-construct the solution. So effectively, it's about expanding at the procedural level. This would mean shifting the focus of skills planning from a focus on the skills needed for profit to a focus on the skills needed for social and economic transformation and for community development. For education and training, this then means that we need to focus on this aspect of expanding the capability for voice, expanding people's capacity to engage in dialogue, expanding people's confidence and the ability to engage in public deliberation, as well as shifting the spaces, or what Dean and colleagues have called the mechanisms for negotiation. The capability approach also brings a different way of thinking about the job of education. So in contrast to the instrumental ways in which skills planning usually understands skills as this kind of basket of potatoes you can just hand over to somebody and then they will be okay. Then skill education is seen as having an instrumental and intrinsic and empowerment and distributive role. The instrumental role is, yes, it's about having the knowledge and the skills to do and to work and to function in your family, in your community, and in your workplace. The intrinsic role talks about the sheer joy that human beings have and that they get from learning. And in the absence of learning, people struggle in many cases to be happy. And there's a big literature that talks about the importance of learning for human well-being. In fact, those of us who are online today, many of us have come here voluntarily just to learn from each other and to share with each other. And that's the intrinsic role. It's endemic to being human. The empowerment and redistributive role talks about the ability for people to engage in debate, engage in deliberation, to come together, to collectively change, transform, and resist systems and institutions that are no longer working for their communities. All three of these roles in the capability approach matters. And they interweave, they are interconnected with each other in a number of different ways. So when Sen speaks about freedom and emphasizes that freedom is core to development, it's really talking about two aspects of freedom. The one is the opportunity aspects where people have meaningful opportunities or capabilities. And the other is the process aspect where people have a voice and where their voice matters and where they are able to participate not only in a range of opportunities, but participate in making decisions about which of those opportunities should be available to them. They're able to participate in shaping their landscape. So from a human development approach then, you know, the emphasis in skills planning completely shifts. What we're beginning to talk about is an emancipatory skills planning, where the focus shifts from expanding human capital to focus on building towards social transformation that expands human flourishing and acts towards a capability enhancing society. So just to quickly pull it together, so what does this mean for skills planning? We're talking about a broader information set at the substantive and procedural levels. We're talking about a broader notion of what constitutes work, and I think we should be guided by COVID on what essential work consists of. We're adopting a much broader understanding of what constitutes education and training. We're changing the framing of the good from skills and qualifications in high demand to capability enhancing skills development system, to one that enables and expands and that focuses on social transformation, community development, and human flourishing. Skills in this sense would contribute to the development of a capability enhancing world, a world that opens rather than closes opportunities for people to live, to work, and to be. So social skills ecosystems, I've used the term social skills ecosystems, which kind of puts together skills ecosystem work from Feingold all the way through to Buchanan in the present, and the social ecosystems work of Granger, Spurs, and Hodson. And I wanted to put the two terms together because I think that they're more of a they converge more than they diverge. So the paper talks a little bit more about why I do that, but I'm not going to do that here. The skills ecosystem model is largely historically a research and analytic tradition that drew from labor process theory, political economy, and heterodox economics to try and better understand and explain regional formations. At the heart of the approach is an attempt to understand skills in context and to understand and intervene in the structural factors, institutions, and policies that serve as enablers or disenablers. So the notion of an ecosystem really came out of Feingold's work, and he mapped out the various aspects and the logic of the ecosystem. So you can go and have a look at those if you haven't, and I know many of us have. So Granger, Spurs, and Hodson across a number of different papers have brought the logic of social ecosystems, and they've drawn Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory to focus on the ways in which economically productive forms of activity can be supported through various forms or modes, if you like, of participatory social formations. The aim here is to bring together collaborative networks of business, education, training, communities, local government, and to begin to co-construct the problem and co-construct the solution. Skills in this logic is seen as active and alive, and is seen as forward-looking, not backward-looking. So in our skill system, we tend to gather data starting at the workplace skills plan, and then it goes to the sector skills plan, and at every level, of course, it becomes further disaggregated, and then it goes into national plans, and now we have a list of occupations in high demand, and this is a very different model because it's forward-looking. The commitment here is to understanding skills as they are lived and as they are needed in context and as they are lived in relationship to others and to the planet. It contributes to civic building by emphasizing this collaborative social formations and by emphasizing the need for these social formations to come together, formations that were historically competing formations as well. Okay, so what Granger, Hodson, and Spurs are talking about really is bringing together different players to collectively target a better and more sustainable world, better and more sustainable jobs in terms of work, and better and more sustainable living environments, but to do that at the local level. And they do this by emphasizing these three aspects: working, living, and learning. Working, which is about developing jobs, better and sustainable jobs; living, focusing on the dimensions needed by communities. I mean, we've done a lot of work in local communities, and it's very clear that there are certain and very specific skills needed to support those communities. And if those two components, working and living, could be brought together, perhaps there's something there as well, and learning that cuts across it. I've put 2 quotes in orange, which I'll leave to you to read for a second while I drink some water. So I'm struggling with my voice. And I wanted to just flag Spoor's work and the importance of this work. And I think that these 2 quotes just capture it really well. There's some challenges with SSEs or social skills ecosystem thinking. I mean, Granger and Spoor's map some of them out, and I think that's all true. And they flag the conceptual, you know, that when people think of these regional collaborative networks, they think in terms of elite entrepreneurial ecosystems, because that was the historical formation of them. And systemic, you're working against an entire system, skills development system, perhaps planning system that just doesn't work or think in this way. And what they call techno-political, which is a tension between locally formed SSEs and national policies and practices. And of course, time. That funders really recognize the time that it takes for an SSE to be sustainably formed. I mean, you just can't do this in a year or 2. This is long-term work that takes very careful negotiation and careful mediation. But I think that what they don't talk about is what it might mean for us in South Africa. So SSEs have been applied and thought of and been studied a lot in northern contexts. And we've heard from Spoor, he presented as part of the same webinar series. And I think we need to start thinking, what might this mean in South Africa? I mean, for one, I think we're going to need to take seriously the role of education in advancing the capability for voice in terms of capacity for voice. We're going to need to take seriously the weakness of our local government and the extent to which they would be able to contribute or play a role in such regional structures. The unequal distribution of power is a silent issue in this entire body of literature, and it's something we'll need to talk about. And of course, inequality, you know, who comes to the table and who doesn't. Much of in fact, all the literature talks to SSEs that have been focused on the formal sector, but we know that the majority of the new jobs is in the informal sector in South Africa and in SMME. So what does this mean for us? So recognizing this, I thought, you know, I think that there's much to value in the SSE logic, and there's much to push our thinking about how we might think about skills planning going forward. And I don't think we should ignore these problems, but I think that it's useful to just understand what it might bring to us and how it might shift our thinking. So just a quick summary from the SSE side. So it shifts from analysis of data, of past skills gaps, towards forward-thinking, collaborative, co-construction within regional local contexts, and to an emphasis on both working and living, not just on working. It shifts the role of PSIT as well. PSIT is no longer on the receiving end of lists of scarce skills or occupations in high demand. Instead, TVET colleges are now central players, and universities are key civic anchor institutions. So universities such as our university that takes engagement really seriously, it really stipulates the role that universities should be playing in skills formation as key civic anchor institutions in bringing these players together and bringing these engagements together. Changes the substantive and procedural information gathered, both in terms of the information data sets and the voices who are included, and of course the emphasis on living as well as on working. So what I've done, what I did in the paper was I mapped out the differences between the current national skills planning system and SSE and the capability approach. And I think it's useful to just line them up and begin to see what they bring to the party. So whilst our current National Skills Planning System, or I'm going to call it NSPS, looks at and aims towards economic growth and firm productivity in the hope that this will eventually trickle down, the SSE aims to bring about transformation in education and training and in work in order that regional economies and living and working environments can be sustainably transformed. So a very different goal. The capability approach aims to develop a capability enhancing society through expanding capabilities, meaningful opportunities. Whilst current skills planning focuses on past skills, SSE and CA focuses on future and current skill needs and the mode as being through co-construction and public deliberation. So it's an ongoing process. It's a more responsive process because it's ongoing, allowing for potentially rapid engagement and rapid recognitions of areas where need might be, because it's through a dialogue process as compared to through this linear data collection process that we're using at the minute. Our current skills planning presents data in an increasingly aggregated format, whereas with SSE and CA, data is gathered at the local level and is aggregated or disaggregated as needed. And the emphasis, of course, is on public participation. So it's living data as compared to data sets that are established and then gathered and get bigger and bigger and disaggregated and analyzed by somebody elsewhere. I'm not suggesting that these data sets are not useful at all. I'm actually not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that there might be something else that we need to do, and maybe this is not all that we do, and certainly not the majority of what we do. The role of education and training, I've mentioned it, has changed. No longer are education and training institutions passive recipients, but in fact they are active civic builders and civic anchor institutions, and they are active players. And I really like this quote of Buchanan's where he says colleges have now finally got a VIP ticket to the regionalization ball. And I think it's an important shift in how you might understand the role of colleges in skills development within a particular locale. Education and training from a capability approach now has a critical role to play. It's an empowerment role in expanding the capability of voice and the capability to aspire and redressing adaptive preferences. Check my time. Okay, let's go. Almost finished. The current NSPS uses a deductivist causal logic in its epistemological framing, whereas the SSE uses information and knowledge. It's co-constructed and uses an inductivist logic. So again, two very different modes. The NSPS focuses on the skills needs of the formal. The SSE and CA both allow for skills needs in working, living, and learning, and understands work in its broadest sense. The ontology of the person and of the human being is, of course, radically different, and I think I've spoken about that before. So what does this mean for skills planning? I think we need to put national skills planning back on the table. I think we need to tackle directly our national skills planning system, and we need to consider again the role, the function, and the purpose of our national skills system. We spend an enormous amount of money on it, and the SETAs are locked into these systems as well, where they too have to produce their SSP in a particular format at a particular time. And I think many of the SETAs are trying to find ways of supporting alternate approaches, but it's a really difficult job for them when they are locked in their remit within the framework of the current NSPS. I want to support David and Sapelo's call for a broader skills development vision. I think they're spot on in their emphasis on that. And leading from these two theoretical frameworks are really 5 points about what that vision should be. I think the first is that we need to take seriously that skills planning needs to be about a social transformation agenda, which talks to working, living, and learning, rather than to a narrow human capital economic growth agenda. I think we need to take seriously the need to build democratic systems where the skills needs and the responses there too can be co-constructed. This system of gathering workplace skills plans and it moving up the system, it's not working, it hasn't worked. And it's enormously, enormously expensive system. and we respond to it. It's a system that matters. Our migration policies are linked to it. NSFAS has a proportion of its funding linked to it. Universities are incentivized to link to the occupations in high demand. Our TVET college are incentivized to, so the entire system responds to this very fallible information that we've been collecting. We need to move away from instrumental understandings of skills and adopt a broader notion of education and training that recognizes the multiple roles that education and training plays in human flourishing and in poverty alleviation. And we need to recognize work in its broader sense. I don't think COVID has allowed any of us to live with the illusion that we can continue functioning as if work takes place in the formal sector, and particularly in large enterprises in the formal sector, and that we can ignore small, medium-sized enterprises, care work, and the informal sector. And I think we need to take really seriously that skills needs to be orientated towards social transformation, community development, and human flourishing. So in short, I think for me, the argument is that there's now an urgent need for new approaches to how we think about the NSPS, you know, and to develop an NSPS that's informed by a different set of assumptions, driven by different indicators, inclusive of different voices, undertaken through different processes, and of course, directed towards different goals. I'm not suggesting that the capability approach and the social skills ecosystems are the only approaches. You know, both of these have been approaches, particularly in the social ecosystem, SPUR's work. And these approaches have only been brought to skills development in the last, decade, so they're quite new. There might be other approaches as well, but I wanted to bring these two because I think they have something, they put something on the table for us and they allow us to think about a possible way forward. We've been critiquing skills for quite a while now, and I think that we need to start thinking about how we unpack and how we begin to rejig this huge octopus that we have, which is our national skills planning system. So colleagues, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for being here and thank you for engaging with us. Do I hand back to you, Stephanie, or do I hand to Prish?
I'll come in and share the discussion. Thank you so much, Leslie, and really thought-provoking presentation. And I think there's a lot of positive feedback on your concluding slide. People think it's Salim Vali is saying it's a very important vision and way forward. And Annette Loubser is saying the conclusion makes perfect sense, provides for diversity and agility, which will make a big difference. So I think that was a very inspirational note on which to end. So thanks so much, Leslie. I want to invite people to put their questions into the Q&A or to raise their hands and ask questions. I don't see any hands up at this point, and I don't see questions up at this point. So I'm gonna jump in. So I found it really interesting, Leslie, and I think that I think you started by saying there's all of these critiques and you're kind of taking them as given. And you ended with this inspirational and aspirational vision, which I think, as I said, people are really resonating with. So the part that I am concerned about is the bit in the middle. And I really understand what you were saying about the skills ecosystems.
Yes.
Because I can see how that offers an alternative to the kind of skills planning model that we have now. I don't understand, and maybe this is because I'm not sympathetic to the capabilities approach. And so maybe there's something that I'm just missing. But if you could just explain for us, I don't understand how the capabilities approach can help us solve the skills planning problem. And I think you're completely right that as you said, we agree on the critiques. So if we agree that the current approach is mainly based on data from big employers. It's narrow and economistic. It's only telling us what the skills needs are that some large employers think they need. Okay, so let's agree that that's a problem. And yet our system allegedly doesn't actually tell us what they need. Our system is failing to do that small, narrow job. What does it mean to then decide on the skills that are needed for working and living and learning in all of these broader contexts that you're talking about? How do we actually do that? And what does it actually mean? How do we, because skills planning is ultimately two things. It's a curriculum issue, what needs to be in the substance of education programs, and it's an enrollment issue. How many programs should be funded? How many, how many learners do we want in what kinds of programs, right? And we're trying to get information about that, and it's not really working. Now, I can see how the skills ecosystems or the social skills model provides an alternative, but I struggle to see what the capabilities framework does for us that helps us actually do something with the education system. I don't know if that's very clear. Maybe it's just my own poor understanding of the literature. But that's what I was really thinking about when you were presenting. And now I do have a question in the chat, and I would please like to ask people that we want to keep the chat for chatting, and the questions, the Q&A for questions, or letting people put up their hands. So I do have one question in the chat, and I've also got Adam Cooper with his hand up, so I'm going to permit him to speak. Leslie, do you want to answer my question and then take the others, or shall we take them all?
Stephanie, we've been saying we're going to have a chat for ever so long, and we haven't. And a part of me feels that we should do what we used to do when we were girls and huddle in front of a hot fireplace with a glass of wine and spend 4 or 5 hours together, because I think this is a much bigger debate. To answer it in brief, I think what the capability approach does do is it insists on what the goal should be. And it makes it very, very clear that the goal should be about a transformed society where people are able to live meaningful lives, or lives which, for a reason that matters to them, they find meaningful. It has to be a meaningful society, a meaningful set of opportunities available to people. And I think that if you take the capabilities approach out, you risk that lens getting lost. And in fact, we have had that lens get lost. And so just to pick up on the question, in the capability approach, a meaningful opportunity is not defined from the outside, it's defined from the people who in that particular community or environment or locale. So of course, there are some meaningful opportunities that are generic, like being able to maybe sleep and eat and have a roof, or have decent work, or be respected. So there are some that are generic, and there are some that are decided at a local level, because I might make different decisions to you. And so diversity is not just respected, but celebrated. And I get that there are weaknesses with the capability approach. I understand those. But I think I like the fact that it's unapologetic about its commitment to social transformation, to human well-being, to social justice. And it insists over and over and over again, no matter what you put on the table, you cannot lose that lens. And I think that for me is very important. I really like that it insists that a key part of what education should be doing is about expanding voice, expanding the capacity for voice, expanding the opportunities for voice. And I like this very much. And again, that's a non-negotiable. Public deliberation, dialogue, and voice is absolutely essential. And we've lost that, haven't we? I mean, we lose that in our current system. And there is a risk that one might lose it again. So I like that insistence very, very much. I really like that they separate resources and outcomes. And I think that separation is so important because, you know, we've come with this kind of redistributive justice approach. And so we thought if we give people scholarships, we bring NSFAS in, and it will end, and we expand enrollment, and we give people the opportunity to walk through the door, in fact, you'll have the same outcome. And the capability approach has told us, well, actually, no, you don't, because people have different conversion factors. It's a lot more subtle than that. And so I like that emphasis on conversion factors. I think it's very useful. And for me, social skills ecosystems is I'm beginning to think of it as a conversion factor, as a space in which it enables people to use resources or use opportunities and convert that into meaningful work, meaningful living, meaningful life. So that's the way I understand it. And I don't understand skills planning as being a curriculum issue and being an enrollment issue. I don't. I really don't. I understand it is much bigger than that. But I don't also, you know, the two of us really can spend hours on this. And so I'd almost want to not, I want to just book that glass of wine around the fire with you, Stephanie, the moment that COVID is lifted and we can spend that time, some more time together. But there are many other people, I think.
We do have a lot of questions coming in. But I am looking forward to that glass of wine around the fire, Leslie. And I have to ask you, what is skills planning then to you? But you don't have to answer that now. I'm going to give Adam the opportunity to ask his question, and then I'll. I don't know if you want me to read the questions that are in the chat and the Q&A, Leslie. I think it's probably helpful for me to do so. But over to you first, Adam.
Thank you, Steph. I hope you can hear me. And thanks, Leslie, for your presentation. What I really liked about it was that it brings kind of a set of social questions to the front, and a set of what might be considered more economic questions are sort of included in that. My question, which I think is partly what Stephanie is alluding to, is the term and the concept skills still relevant to the kinds of development projects that you're talking about, and should we throw out the term skills? And part of the reason I ask this as a kind of follow-up, and I'd also like to actually ask Stephanie the same question in reading her work, is in dipping into this literature around skills and reading Christopher Winch's, one of his papers on the term skills in the English language in comparison to the way it's used in other European countries, which is not primarily as a performance-based set of actions that are marketized in a market. And so my question is, if we are going to move away from seeing it in those market terms and moving towards, and something that Stephanie would also, I'm sure, agree with in terms of notions of occupations as something embedded in community and as mentored and as part of a social system, is the term skills the right term for what we're talking about? Thank you.
Do you want to jump straight into that one, or do you want to take a few questions? It's a great question.
Maybe just to respond to Adam, I think that the discourse that we've gotten locked in is a complex discourse. And, you know, one of the political value of a term like skills, or another one would be sustainable development, or another would be skills development, is that it allows us all to be talking about quite different things whilst we sit in the same room happily agreeing with each other. And so I think it's important that you flag this, because it's effectively what you're flagging is that we're dealing with a term that has, and you flag it in your question up front, you know, we're dealing with a term that has social implications. We're dealing with a term that you can look at from an economic perspective, a social perspective, and now with Stephanie's emphasis, you know, from a curriculum and a perspective. So we're actually looking at the same term from very different angles. And as a country, I think we're going to have to unpack what that might mean for us. My own bias to whatever we might choose to use, be it okay, if however we might choose to understand it, my own bias would be to locate it in its social understandings, because I think that that is the most useful for work and for living and for transformation. That it's part of a much bigger debate, but I'd like to hear from Stephanie as well. And there are also some questions that we need to take.
Yeah, I think, let me, you can, as you can imagine, I have a lot to say, but let me just, let's just let some of the participants ask their questions first. And then we can come back if there's time. Otherwise, Adam, we might invite you to our fireplace with our wine. So Khaleesi asks, in trying to better understand meaningful opportunity, what does its scope cover? For example, does it cover individual skills and what opportunities those may create for the individual at individual level? Or does it entail external factors such as job opportunities? Or are we referring to a combination of individual and external factors? And then we have a question from Alison. Thanks so much for a very interesting presentation. The capabilities approach reminds me of Marilyn Waring's 1990 book, which raised important questions about the limitations of economic measures like GDP, including a disregard for the invisible work of women and the cost of environmental degradation. Any comments? And then in the Q&A, we have a question from Glenn, who says, it seems that we do need to be able to talk about meaningful and in a meaningful and evidence-based way about what skills might be needed in society and what skills we should prioritize when we invest in education and skills development. I think that's kind of what I was trying to say, actually. Part of the problem, as Leslie says, is that our approach to this is usually narrow and economistic, and I like her critique of this. A different problem, I suspect, is that the concept skills planning itself, even from a narrow economic perspective, sorry, I'm reading this wrong. The problem is that we can't really plan the future, but we can foreshadow and anticipate it. We can have intelligent and informed conversations about different futures and the kinds of skills that might be needed. And we should bring different kinds of information to bear on our analysis of the skills we should cultivate, invest in, and prioritize. So is it helpful still to think of skills planning, or do we need a different language? Which kind of takes us back to Adam's question, but you know, my response to it was going to be that I think we do need to think about knowledge and skills as separately from all of these other issues that we aspire to in our society. And then the last question, but maybe not planning, sorry, in relation to Glenn's question. Then we have a question from Robin Ann Ferguson. Please comment on the informal training and development which occurs in a formal setting. For example, JSE listed companies. This non-accredited informal training is developed to meet the specific needs of the company and is paid for by the 20% gap allowed in the CETA system. This training also scaffolds the gap of poor education by necessity. I ask this as I've been involved in this informal training for many years and have trained hundreds of people who otherwise would have been excluded altogether because the formal system does not provide for this particular training, required as it often is, insensitive or logistically very difficult for learners to attend colleges. So some three rather different questions and comments for you there, Leslie.
You know, I just want to say that I'm not suggesting that we throw away skills planning. You know, to be a state means you need to plan. And in order to plan, you need some kind of metrics. So I fully agree with you on that, Glenn. The point is to begin to build into that system, I think, to open up spaces where we can try and we can experiment with different versions of this. You know, where we can begin to set up some of these ecosystems, where we can begin to explore. We don't have the answers theoretically. I mean, we can debate this theoretically, and much of this theory draws from Northern context. We need to be able to test it in our context. The point is to open space for that experimentation, to open space for that testing, and then to talk with each other, not based on our literature reviews, much of which is Northern, and not just based on, of course, we have our own experiences in the country, but in terms of planning a way forward, I don't think we have another option. I think it is about experimentation, and it's experimentation on the edges and testing and trying different models. And I don't think we've opened up enough space for that. And I don't think our national skills planning system allows enough space for that. And even with colleagues of ours who we know quite like this thinking, they're often really constrained in being able to do this kind of work. It's difficult work for them because they're swamped in terms of their national skills planning deadlines, you know. So when I suggest that we open up the debate, and when I say that I think we need to be talking about a different system, I'm not suggesting that we take the hammer to the house. You know, I'm suggesting that we begin to experiment, and that we open up debate from those spaces, and that if we can come back a year or in 2 years or 3 years and we can say, you know, we tried this and this is what happened, or we tried that and this is what happened, I think we've made some progress, because I think we need to move beyond just the critique of the skills mismatch. Much as I appreciate that powerful work that's been done by so many people and amazing work. So that's really my position on it at this point. Glenn is saying, yeah, he agrees that we need to open up space for this. And just to comment about the informal training that's taking place in formal sectors, Robin Ann, thanks for sharing that. And the formal sector is indeed doing some amazing training, what you're calling informal training and development. And it's a pity that we are not able to, we haven't captured that well, and we really haven't as a country captured that well. I mean, I stumbled across some women's development projects that a local company was doing, like absolutely incredible work that they've been doing. They've been doing it for quite a while and we just didn't know about it. So there's stories in that space that also haven't been adequately shared, I think.
Thanks, Leslie. I think Glenn was saying, he is agreeing on the need to open up space, but his question is the concept or terminology of skills planning accurate or helpful? Then we've got a question from Joy Papier, who says, thanks, Leslie, for a great presentation. I get the need for more locally relevant planning and skills that are meaningful to individuals, but in South Africa, where people are not tied to particular skills contexts, for example, within provinces, and easily move to follow their aspirations and needs, how helpful is such localized planning that might lock people into narrowly focused skills development? And then quite on a different note from Joel Ramaklape, my view is that skills as understood in an economic world are separate from capabilities, as these do not have monetary value. Could this be the reason why there is so much focus on skills rather than capabilities? In other words, a capability becomes a skill once a monetary value can be attached to the capability. And then just a comment from Sylvia Hammond, who's saying that Engstrom and Sanino's third generation interventions could contribute to answering some of these questions. But that's a comment, so I think you don't need to respond to that unless you want to. And if you could answer the questions from Joy and Joel.
Joy, you know, just to say that the poor don't move unless they're really forced to. It's very expensive to move and it's very hard to move. And in our study that we're doing with you on the DET TVET Colleges study, the cost that these young people pay to move to enroll in a TVET college, which is not close to their home, is enormous, the personal cost I'm talking about. So I think I hear you when you say that what's the point of planning locally, but I don't think you can plan jobs and community development, living and working in any other way but locally. I think it has to be local. And the comment on capabilities and skills, you know, I think that's why I like the capabilities approach to be central, because the emphasis isn't about skills. The emphasis is on opportunities. Skills is just one medium, one possibility that makes an opportunity worthwhile. And yes, a skill in itself could be an opportunity, being able to get it, but I like the emphasis on meaningful opportunities for living and working and for flourishing life. For me, that's really important.
Siphello, his work has been cited much in this presentation, so we're very happy to have you here, Siphello. Says, what may help, Leslie, is a conceptualization of how we arrived at skills planning and what has shaped this historically. For instance, the move from manpower planning to skills planning, what actually results in these changes, or are we back to manpower planning? Siphello, do you wanna actually, can I
Yeah, talk to us, people. Why are you not talking to us?
Yeah, we want to hear other voices, and I'm not sure if if I'm understanding your point well, Siphello, although now my thing doesn't want to give him speaking rights, but Alyssa or Prisha can jump in and do that, and then we can force him to speak. My computer is, or my Zoom system or something is not on my side here. Some more comments coming in saying thanks for the presentation and the people really enjoyed it. And Prisha or Palesa, can you please give Siphello speaking rights? I don't know why my thing won't do it. No, I did it to the wrong person now. Sorry, Sylvia.
Well, Sylvia can speak in the meantime, because I'm really tired of talking. Sylvia, we can hear from you. What are your opinions?
I'll unmute and I'll just fill in while you sort out the technical issue. Okay, now you got Siphello back. Okay, I'll go away.
No, Sylvia, you can go ahead.
I was absolutely fascinated, and thank you extremely. This has been so extremely useful to me. Thank you so much. I really appreciated it. I wanted to just make one comment that is slightly to the left side. You know, we're talking about skills planning from a conceptual point of view, and I would think it's quite important to drill down into what is actually happening with those workplace skills plans and so on. I'll explain quickly why. I attend one of the SETA's sector skills planning meeting in the food industry, food manufacturing, and I look at all the things that they've got planned and they've identified as scarce. And I say to them, just a minute, there's not a single solitary mention here of packaging anywhere along that line of packaging operators. No, nothing. And yet every one of us has gone out and bought food packaging and cut our hands trying to get it open with a knife or something because it didn't work. And that, I think, is just an example of how the system actually works. It's completed by people who don't necessarily have direct experience to make that contribution. So it's almost a broken telephone, you know. This person tells that person to tell that person who puts it in the workplace skills plan, but it actually does not have relevance to what is really needed. That was just my thought. Anyway, I'll leave it, Isabella. I'll leave it to you.
Am I still there? Am I there now?
Yes,
Yeah, no. Oh, okay. So, hello, Leslie, and hello, everybody.
Hi, Siphello. Siphello, put your video on.
I can't. Oh, you don't want to see me now? No, fine. No, I'm just joking. But I don't mind if you put my video. All I was trying to say, and maybe it's a subject of a separate paper, you know, this question of like the genesis of this issue of skills planning, like historically, what has shaped it? I'm thinking, like, for instance, in South Africa, we come from that old history of manpower planning. You know, in Afrikaans, they call it manne bekrag planning. But what has always shaped this is this idea that there actually can be a direct kind of connection between education, training, and the labor market and the economy. And over time, these relations have changed because the structure of the capitalist economy has also shifted, you know, from the early industrialization or even periods earlier than that. There have been massive restructurings in the content of the capitalist economy over time. And I mean, some might argue that, of course, in a socialist economy, there was probably centralized planning. Okay, so there might have been some kind of larger scale planning. But the point is that these shifts that have happened over time, and now we talk about skills planning in the conditions of human capital theory and influenced by these changes in the structure of the capitalist economy. So that for me, I think is maybe a subject of a separate paper, but what David and I tried to grapple with in the paper with the 7 problems was basically like the conceptual and the empirical questions. You know, so like, is like when we talk about skills, like what are the problems? We try to identify and break it down, because we started by saying, okay, what kind of data is available about this, but how do people frame it? Okay, so both in policy documents and in academia. So that's what okay, now I've gone beyond what my question was, but I was just trying to point out maybe that kind of genesis of what has shaped it. And maybe that's where, like the other points that were made, like Adam's point that was made, that maybe we're no longer even talking about the same thing, you know, we're talking about occupations, we're talking about communities, and of course the social conditions. So it's the skills planning that is done, and then the skills blending that we need, you know, that kind of issue, you know. So yeah, yeah. Sorry, I just want to leave it there. Okay. All right, you can mute me now.
Thanks, Apelo. You know, I think it's an important point, and I went down that rabbit hole to such a degree that I was looking at the Hansard, looking at politically, just, I mean, it's an intense discussion that one needs to have in terms of those underpinning assumptions and what's been driving this for the last, not since 1994, since way before, actually, way before. And I think we need to have those discussions, but at the same time, I think we shouldn't just stop at those discussions. You know, I think we need to be pushing for spaces for experimentation, and I think we need to be mobilizing for those spaces where one can begin trying different types of skills planning and skills approaches. So that's where I'm at now. And yeah, I think there's an urgency around it as well. I suppose that's probably what I'm talking about. It's that urgency. We've been having these dialogues for a while, and Salim cited your paper in he and Enver's book, and it's a lovely paper, and so yeah, people should go and look at it. It's worth reading. But we're some years on from this, you know, and I'm pushing for something that politically, I think I'm pushing for something, and I'm pushing for spaces for experimentation at local levels where we can try some different thinking.
Yeah, Leslie, I completely 100% agree with you. We need different thinking urgently, because otherwise we just keep doing minor variants of the same thing. Yeah. And it's never getting us anywhere.
Yeah.
And I do think that we need space for local experimentation. I mean, where I would add is, and I think maybe this in a way speaks to Joy's issue, because for me the local ecosystems is one thing, but sectoral and industrial is another. And I think that's where we need much closer engagement and dialogue and ongoing kind of interrelations between education providers and different players in different economic, whether it's economic development trajectories or plans, like the plans to grow the township economy. I don't know if they're ever going to happen, but we do have those plans in our national development processes, or particular industrial sectors, industrial strategies, you know, whatever it is. How are we thinking about seeing skills as much more embedded within those processes? as opposed to this kind of thing that you plan for at the end and then hope that the education system will just produce, like a factory specified product. So I think that, for me, that's another way in which we could be opening up space for, and, at the same time thinking about sectors from the perspective of decarbonizing, from the perspective of transforming the nature of work, from the perspective of the role they're playing in the economy, and also thinking about what kinds of knowledge and skills should be built in those sectors in order to do those things. And I think you're right. I think it's urgent, and our systems are just absolutely not getting us anywhere. Sylvia can unmute herself and read out what she's written in the comments, seeing that she is now still in the panelists.
Thank you, Steph. Yes, I just wanted to build on what Sipelo said. Just recently, obviously writing up my thesis, I was reading backwards into the 80s. And I am struck by the influence of the 80s that continued into the 90s, and the Manpower Training Act, although officially it was no longer in existence, there were various sections of it which remained alive as if it had not been repealed. And I think it is well worth us questioning what we're actually doing and why, and those influences. I think Sipelo has something there, because we didn't start tabula rasa at 94. A whole lot of the history lives with us, it's still here with us. And anyway, I 100% agree with you in terms of the urgency and the need to do something. We must do something now. Agree. Thank you for this afternoon. It's been great.
It has been really great, and we do have one more question that I think we should. It would be nice to have a question from Canada. I don't know if you want to read your question out, Ushnish Sengupta, or I can read it. Oh, I do have a hand up also from Yael Shalem, and I don't know why I can't. Okay, there, it's working now. And Annette Loubser. So let's get those in before we end. I think it's been a really stimulating session. The Canadian question is, there's a major push through government funding, and I think this is what I was talking about in relation to enrollment planning, for AI and high-tech skills development at the expense of other skills. Are other countries trying to emulate the economic success of Silicon Valley as well? So I think that's an interesting question. And I'm going to just ask Yael to quickly ask her question. And then Annette. And then we'll really have to end. So can you come in, Yael, can you quickly unmute yourself and ask your question? Or shall we start with Annette? Because
I didn't have a question. It was just, I don't know why the hand was up, but I can ask.
The hand was, yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. I mean, I was thinking when you said that we need more conversations and more experimentation. I was thinking, what will be the object of study? What are we going to? What, in your theory, where do you think we need to start? Is it about the experiences that people have in terms of opportunities that they have to understand the capabilities that are distributed or not? Do we need to start with structural constraints that are there in terms of our system? So if you want, you can answer that.
If you want, if you can answer it in 2 minutes, but I'm quickly just going to let Annette ask her question, and then we'll hand over to you, Leslie, for your concluding comments.
Stephanie, I don't actually have a question. so much as, sorry, I haven't got a video thing. But I think I think that I could add value to this discussion, in the sense that I was a training provider in a rural area and teaching furniture making. And now that I look, and the thing that was really interesting was that the community I was working in, through this process, which had been done through consensus and by a request, was that we discovered that the people had been they had actually been forcibly removed from the Knysna area. And in actual fact, there was a tradition of furniture making. That was the first thing. The other thing was that the actual qualification that they actually did was in actual fact making something which didn't involve, it was all handheld tools because of the rural environment that I was working in. And so, but now the new qualification uses glues, and it actually uses big machinery, electric machinery and things, which in actual fact is sort of undermines it because what was really interesting was from this outcome was that a lot of women were exceptionally good woodworkers. This was something that, and I also found that what came out of this was that in actual fact the Franchise Association was very interested in what this program had actually delivered, because in actual fact the cost of this handcrafted work could add value to using hand skills to furniture in the urban areas. So there we actually, it's quite a nice example of how a whole lot of factors haven't been considered. Now, in actual fact, this whole kind of training has moved into the fiber processing SETA, when in actual fact it could actually be spread across into the CAF SETA and into other SETAs as well. So this is just one example where I think what you're discussing today can actually, does have value.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annette, for that contribution. And Leslie, I'm going to hand over to you. And you've only got 1 minute now. There is one more comment from Francis, but I'm going to leave the people to read it. I'm going to hand over to you, Leslie, to close. And I would like to say just before that, just to remind people who are in the seminar that we have a master's program which deals with many of these really fascinating and challenging issues at the Real Centre. Focused on different aspects of the education-work relationship. So please do spread the word, because we are taking enrollments now for next year. Over to you, Leslie.
Yael, I'm not sure how to respond to this, because I'm not really talking about an object of study. And just to also talk back to your point earlier, Stephanie, where you were saying, of course, we're talking about industrial, sectorial, which extends beyond the local, but the experience and the way in which it's responded to and the way in which it's experienced is often at the local, and so, Yael, if I was to answer, I would say that it's about bringing people together into collective dialogue, where people can begin to share their experiences and begin to talk in a kind of social skills ecosystem way about what skills might mean for social transformation, working and living in their context. I think that's really the point. And it's so maybe, yes, we should rather talk outside of the space, because it's a bigger discussion. I want to say thank you so much to the Real Centre for not just this webinar, but the whole series. It's been really fantastic. And also to everybody who participated. It was wonderful seeing people I haven't seen for a while, like Glenn, my old boss and colleague and friend. So wonderful having Glenn here. I can't even tell you, and I haven't seen you for so long. So, and just the feedback and the engagement, was really rich. And I think that we need to continue engaging on this topic. And I think we mustn't lose the urgency. These are not theoretical engagements only, it's not It's not about which knowledge or which knowledges are we going to kind of come down on at the particular moment. But there are some practical consequences for many, many, many people. And there are practical consequences for our world of making decisions and also of not making decisions. And there's a lot of power in the space, in the sense of people who have voices, who can be heard, who can speak, and who will be heard. And I just think that matters, and we should use our voices to start pushing for these experimental spaces. And I certainly am using mine because I think it matters. And our job as academics goes beyond sharing our ideas. It goes to that point where we have to think about what do ideas mean and how do they become practical. And so in this sense, the seminar series has been great because it's put so many ideas on the table, and it's also rubbed out emphatically many ideas that have existed before. And I'm so happy that they've been recorded. You know, I was saying to Steph beforehand, because I think they're going to stand as a resource for many, 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 many years to come. You'll find in 10 years' time, PhD supervisors calling their PhD students to listen to you louder and Stephanie Olaus's presentation, you know, so they're an incredible record of this moment in our time. So thanks so much, colleagues, for that.
So, Prisha, I'm not sure if you need to, are you going to come in and close? I also really want to thank Leslie. It's been a fantastic afternoon. I think that there's been so many positive comments from participants, and I think it's been a really, really stimulating session. So thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us and sharing your ideas. And I think we've all really learned a lot and thought a lot. And we all really, I hope, share your sense of urgency. Preesh?
Thank you so much. And thanks again, Leslie. We've really enjoyed the afternoon. It's generated a lot of discussion. And thank you. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to prepare seminars. So a huge thank you to you. I know how busy you are to have taken the time and responded positively to our invitation to present. Just a quick reminder, Leslie's seminar will join the others that are in the series on the YouTube channel. The link is there. Steph mentioned our master's program at Real. I have added the brochure in the chat if anyone is interested, and please feel free to circulate it in your communities. We'd like to increase the number of people who are researching the post-school sector and some of these issues in our country. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, Leslie and everyone else. The next seminar is on the 8th of September. And on the 8th, and so we're hoping that you're going to join us again. The invitation you will receive via email. If you've attended this seminar, you'll be added to our database. You will get the invitation for the next seminar via the email, and you'll find the recording of today's session on the YouTube site. Thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye. Bye, Leslie.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Bye, everyone.
Bye, 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 bye. That wine and fireplace, say, Steph. Bye, 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 bye.
I'm really looking forward to it. Preferably in your part of the world.